Okay, this is neuron structure and relay arc, part of B6. Your nervous system is actually in two parts. The first part we would consider is your brain spinal cord. And do note the spelling here of cord. It's not like a musical chord with an H in, it's spelt without one. Together, these parts make up your central nervous system, or sometimes simply CNS. However, you've also, of course, got lots and lots of other neurons in the body. So, for example, your sensory neurons, you've got sensory neurons that come from all parts of your body, would all go into the spinal cord, and then any nerve impulse, that's a good word to use. Nerve impulse, meaning a message sent along a nerve. It's better than saying messages or electrical signals. Nerve impulse is a good one to use. So here we've got, for example, our sensory neurons, which are taking information from receptors to the spinal cord up to the brain. And of course we've also got the motor neurons, I'll use black for this, which are taking messages from the brain back down the spinal cord to the effectors, muscles and glands. And an effector, let's put it down here, it's worth making note of, is either going to be referring to a muscle, so something that perhaps can make you move away from something. It could be the muscles that control movements in your gut, around your eye to make the pupil open and close. It will be either a muscle or a gland. And a really good word to look out for here is secrete, which, if you like, means to squeeze out a liquid. For example, your sweat glands secrete sweat to cool you down. That's the response to your internal body temperature raising. Your salivary glands secrete saliva. Very often the glands we'll be talking about as effectors would squeeze out or secrete a hormone. So, for example, your pancreatic gland, your pancreas, squeezes out hormones. Okay, so effectors are going to be muscles or glands, things that secrete. So back to here, we had the idea that sensory neurons did in green, and the motor neurons taking messages from the central nervous system to the rest of the body. These two things together are referred to as your peripheral nervous system, or PNS. So the motor and sensory neurons, peripheral nervous system, brain and spinal cord are the central nervous system. Just to look at the structure a little bit, you get this familiar, hopefully familiar now to you, idea of, there we go. Here's a neuron. Don't, whatever you do, I'm not even going to write it down, don't refer to them as nerves. A nerve is something different. A nerve is a big bundle of these. There could be hundreds or thousands of these in a nerve. A neuron is the individual cell, and that's what you'll be talking about. So we've got a nucleus. This bit is actually sometimes referred to as the cell body. We have this long strand coming off called an axon, and the direction of the nerve impulse is away from the cell body. Okay. This bit at the end would perhaps be connecting to a muscle or a gland, or as we now know to call them, an effector. And the other bit that we do need to be aware of is, I'm not drawing it very well, what's called the fatty sheath. And this is a substance basically which is fat secreted in the body, and it does two jobs. It insulates the neurons. So an easy way to think of that, imagine you have a load of cables behind your telly, and there's all these cables and wires. Imagine if there was no plastic insulation on them. They'd all be touching each other and sparking and shorting out and all sorts. And it's the same idea here really, that these neurons, if they were touching each other, you could be sending a signal one direction, but it would also send the nerve impulse another one because it was touching something else. So this fatty sheath helps to insulate it. It also, though, speeds up the impulse, or it speeds up the signal. We don't need to know this, but the way it does it, if you notice it's not wrapped all the way along, there's gaps between it. And so instead of having to go all the way, it actually jumps between these little gaps. And that's why it speeds it up. Just I think it's worth mentioning on this as well. If you imagine me cutting through the axon, so we were looking down the length of it, so I was looking along it, the sheath kind of winds its way around. It starts growing and it winds around like that. You don't always get that idea from looking at it here. It just looks like a little block, but it winds its way around the axon. So the fatty sheath insulates, speeds up, and it's wound around the axon. Okay, finally, just want to say a couple of bits about this idea of a reflex arc. Now, again, let's have a bit of a drawing. It's not a very good one, never mind. This is something similar to what's drawn in your book. It's the idea of a leg. Yeah, that is meant to be a leg. And if you, for example, were to stand on a pin, okay, we have in here, let's follow this through, we've got a receptor cell that can detect pain in your foot. The message would go along a sensory neuron, let's keep the colours the same, and it would go all the way up to your spinal cord. Now, if we follow the pattern that we followed before, it would go up to your spinal cord, up to your brain, and your brain would say, "Ow, just a minute, there's some pain in my foot, I need to do something about it, or it's going to hurt me." It would send a message back down the motor neuron, and you'd move your foot. Now, that does actually happen. The message does still go to your brain, and it's fairly quick. However, there is a quicker mechanism in play. So if we try and draw a bit of the spine here. Now this is what we might call a cross section of the spine. I'll try and draw it in kind of 3D for you. Your spine looks a little bit like this, and then there's another one underneath, and it just continues down. So if you can imagine what a spine looks like, what I've tried to draw there is, so the spinal cord would kind of go down the middle. What I've drawn is through that cross section. And what the sensory neuron does, it goes into the spine, and this message would then shoot off up to the brain. But at the same time, we've got a much shorter little neuron that sits in here, and it's called a relay neuron. What it does is it instantly takes the message across to a motor neuron, which is going to take the message to an effector in your foot, or in your, in this case, in your calf. Okay, so there's our effector, which again, always worth mentioning it. Effectors are muscles and glands. The overall effect of this is that the foot is moved away far more quickly. So even though the message is still going up to the brain, your brain is processing it, making sense of it, and send it back. By the time your brain has realised what's happened, you've already moved your foot. So you've already avoided potential damage to the part of the body. Remember, reflexes are all about protection, avoiding danger, avoiding damage. So the relay neuron, it's this very small neuron that just sits inside the spine, and it connects the sensory and the motor neuron. Do remember, the message does still continue up to the brain, it's just that it's gone in very quickly and shot back out again. So that's the relay arc, as it's called: sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron.